Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you how to make a super simple router sled. Now, a lot of videos you may see on the internet really overcomplicate this process. So I'm going to show you a super simple but efficient way to make this. Router sleds are definitely something you need for your woodworking shop. Now, if you obviously have big industrial belt sanders or something, then maybe you don't need it. But for 99% of us, a router sled is something you will need in your shop at one time or another. They're perfect for edge grain cutting boards, for flattening them out because they can't go through a planer. They're really, really good. And what you'll probably use it for is once you start getting into slabs, which is kind of my next project's coming up. We'll do a lot of slab work. So I wanted to remake one here for you guys. But it's for flattening slabs that are too big for your planer, too big for your jointer. This is what you use it for. So when it comes down to flattening big things, all you're going to need is your router and then this sled, and you'll be good to go. Throughout this build, I'll probably list up the things that I'm doing differently than what you're going to see on other internet videos and why I'm doing them. And then also some of the things that people are doing that I think you definitely should be doing on yours. So follow along and you'll see those come up. All right, guys, I'm going to make this out of 3/4 inch MDF. You could use 3/4 inch plywood. You'll see that on a lot of other builds. But you know how it is, Lowe's or Home Depot. The plywood you're getting there is most of the time crooked. So I like to stick with the MDF just because I know I'm getting truly flat and truly straight edges. And then that makes this whole process so much more simple. Right now I have an 8x4 sheet, but really you don't need that much. I just went ahead and bought the whole sheet, but I'm going to cut it just about half. So we'll have about 4x4 for this build. All right, gotta tell you, if you're using MDF, definitely wear a mask or cut it outside because it makes a mess. Right, now that I got our 4-foot-by-4-foot section, these are just some foam boards. I think I got them at Lowe's, but it's perfect when cutting plywood, MDF, because you can throw it under here, cut with your blade and not have to worry about going through these and into your workbench. There's about 2 ways you can go about cutting this. The first one would be to use a straight edge guide for your circular saw, which I built this in other videos you can see. Or if you have a table saw, you're definitely going to want to go there. But with the table saw, which is what I'm going to use, with the table saw, this 4x4 is still a little bit too big. So we want to, I'll probably cut it in half one more time. But the key thing to do here, even if you're using the straight edge, the orientation of the cut. So right now we have a 4x4. So it doesn't seem like the orientation of the cut matters, but we have 3 sides that were factory cut true, and then 1 side that we did with the circular saw, so it's going to be off a little bit. So what you want to do for mine, that's the end that had the circular saw cut. So that's my bad. Here's my 3 goods. I want all my strips to be cut between 2 goods. So this is a good side, this is a good side. So I want to rip it going down this way. So to split it in half, I'm going to do one straight down the middle here. This is 2 feet, so I'm going to use it to make my line. Don't get confused by what I said earlier, because I'm going to be cutting this way, because I'm going to go ahead and rotate it a 1/4 turn. Just not a huge deal if this line's not the straightest one in the world. As long as we've still got factory edge there, we'll base everything else off of that. If you like some of the hacks I've come up with in the past on my videos, then I think you'll really be impressed by this one. It's actually a piece of a fence picket, put up into the rafters there, comes down. I got my clip on my dust collector, and I just clip that right on, and then perfectly hangs above the blade. That collects all the dust that comes flying off. We've got our factory edge to go up against our fence. We're going to go ahead and rip just a little bit off of this to straighten up that edge. Now our next cut will be for the base of what's going to hold up our sled above the workpiece. So the width of this isn't hugely important. It is going to be having another board on top of it. So it needs to be long enough to not topple over. So we'll just make that 6 inches. So we'll cut 2 of those. We've got our 2 6-inch base pieces cut now. So our next cut is going to be for the top of the T where the rail is going to actually go on. So I'll use this to show you. It's going to come onto here. Our rail will be riding across the top of this. So now you just got to decide kind of the height you want. It may go for whatever project you've got going on right now. It may be a big 4-inch piece of wood. So you know it's going to need to be a higher wall here for the slide rail. But a lot of them can be a little bit shorter. Now you can always cut down the material, but you can't add material to it, so don't go too short. And then you can also always add stuff underneath your workpiece that'll bring it up to the slide rail. So there's a whole bunch of kind of options you'll have to go through in your own head. You can make a couple of these just to have different heights. This one's 6 inches. You can see here it's going to be pretty tall. I probably won't need that. So really, if it's down to about 3 inches, that'd be 3 1/4 off of the table. I think that'll fit most of my pieces, and if I need to make a bigger one sometime, I will. All right, guys, now we've got our 3-inch pieces to tee up onto here. Now, you really want to make sure whenever you are cutting these that you had picked the straightest ones you have. Now, we're using this MDF, so they all should be straight. But just make sure if you had any defects in any of yours that it does not come over to these, considering this is where the rail is going to run. So whatever's on here, any dip or something will transfer over to your workpiece. So top of this is very important to be straight. To connect these, we're not going to use wood glue. You just want to screw, and that all goes back to where I said you could change these out if you're in different heights or anything. So you wouldn't want to glue it, or else you have to recut these if you ever need to change something, or if something happens to this top one and you need to change it out. It's best just to use the screws. For screwing these to the base, it's not a dire need that this is perfectly straight. Obviously, you don't want it just to be crazy out of line, but if it's a little bit skewed, it's not going to matter, because it's the whole point of this is just keeping our router at the same level, and that won't change if this is a little bit crooked or anything. So just get some screws underneath. All right, for shooting this onto here, you can set it up here, bring it off, get it underneath the table, look up, and shoot it through. But for me, I'm going to go a little bit easier route, so I thought I'd show you guys if it works for you, is bring it over to your table saw. And what I'm actually going to do is this fence is set up at a perfect height. So I'm going to set that piece there, bring the base up, and then instead of having to get underneath, I can just shoot it from right up here. I'm going to start with my typical countersink bit. You definitely want these screws countersunk in, obviously, because this base will be laying on your workbench. I'm going to go ahead and use my chalk line just so I can mark the middle of these boards and not have to think about it whenever I shoot these pilot holes. Maybe. All right, you guys tell me if I'm still straight on that end. All right, middle of the boards. I can do these pilot holes, not worry about a thing. I'm going to use 1.5 inch screws. I made the first pilot hole. I'm going to go ahead and shoot the first screw just so I can have everything held in place. And once again, not have to think twice whenever I go to do this. If it starts pushing the MDF away, just back it out and then put it back in, and it won't push it away. All right, guys, we got our 2 T's set up for the base. Now, what will happen is we'll do the slide rail for the top. Here's where I differ from some other builds, is most people will continue to use the MDF or some plywood to then make the slide rail. which is good. And I'll show you, my previous one had actually been made with it. So say we've got what would be our MDF slide built, and we got a table where our workpiece is under here. Well, whenever you go to put your router on, and you got your workpiece under here, so it's going to be moving across right here, there is a slight dip in these MDF boards and even in the plywood if you're doing a wide enough slab. Now, if you're doing edge grain cutting boards where this stuff is pulled closer, it's at 20 inches or so, you're not going to really get an effect from the dip. But the whole point of me rebuilding was for doing some tables, so I need one that's going to be sturdy to be able to be spread out 40 inches and not have a dip in the middle. Now, granted, on the other builds, you would see is each side will be set up like this and then another side like this. So that will add strength and durability to it. So if you want to go this route, it's totally fine. You don't do the same thing I do. But I'm just kind of worried about that dip. So what I'm doing that's different about this build is I'm going to go with angle iron. I just picked up from Lowe's. So now this will go across. My router will go in. Now with these, you'll get no dip at all, no matter how wide I spread it. These are 2-inch by 2-inch. So they're very strong, a little bit heavy. Like I said, you can stick and keep using some MDF and make your own slide out of it, which would be this and then another one right here. Then your router would go in between. And that will work great for most causes. But with me beefing this up, I'm going to beef it up to the angle iron. And this will work always, no matter what size workpiece I have. The 2-inch angle iron does raise the cost of this project by about $50. They're about $25 each. One way I kind of justify that in my head is if you're using MDF or plywood, it's going to be 3/4 inch. So your router, for it to plunge to get to the workpiece, it's going to have to get past 3/4 of an inch before it even touches your workpiece. So what that means is if you go this route, you'll have to buy an extender for your router. And if you do, buy the 1/2 inch, not the 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch gets pretty dangerous. But that's another $40 cost just to get the extender. Whereas when using the angle iron, it's only an 1/8 inch thick. So for a lot of applications, you won't need an extender. You'll be able to reach your workpiece just with plunging your router. Now, if you are going to just stick with plywood, no one with angle iron, you can still do this build totally fine and follow along. The only difference is you're going to add a step of measuring out your router base and making sure a blade's going to fit in between. I got these at 2 inches each, so I would just stick with that if I were you guys. Make that 2-inch, 2-inch, and then you'll cut another 2-inch, 2-inch piece because you'll want to angle it up together, just make it look obviously just like that angle iron. This is the way it would be. So you'd make 2 of these, just screwing in on the side, and then you could follow along with the rest of the build. Yours would just be sitting in here like this. Now we've got to cut out a piece that's going to set the distance between the 2 angle irons for our router to sit down into. So I just cut down this piece of MDF just a little bit smaller just to make it manageable here for the video. But grab whatever you have. Make sure you have one that has a straight end on it. But then to set the width of your router inside of there, we're just going to bring it right on over to the table saw and set our fence depth according to the router. The teeth at the tips of them have these little kerfs on them. So I like to try to rotate the kerf down to where that's going to be what's touching the base of my router. And you just want to kiss it up. You don't want to hit too hard or else it's going to bend the blade just ever so slightly that it's going to be too tight for your router to go through the sled. Now you've got it set. Just make sure your flat factory edge is against your fence. Let's go ahead and just test it. So if it's going to be in here, setting the width of our angle iron, how well will the router fit? Now we want to cut this into 4 slices, probably about 4 inches thick. It's not going to matter so much. It's going to go one on the end, one underneath, and then one on the other end, and one underneath. All right, quickly just put a stop block up here. Didn't even measure, but we're around 4 inches. Yep, just under 4 inches. Totally fine. Just about an eighth. I'll cut me 4 of these. One thing to pay attention to as we're going to be setting it in here and bolting it through is you could cut this actually a little bit shorter than what you need because it's not going to reach the ends. Because if we push it all the way to the ends, then because it's rounded here, it's going to bring it up some, and then when we go to bolt it, it's going to bring it. So it has to be backed off a little bit to get it off of those rounded edges so it'll sit flat and pull everything together. I have some bolts and nuts just sitting around the shop. So these are 1/4 inch. So you'll want to get your 1/4 inch drill bit. What you'll do is go ahead and drill through the MDF till you hit the steel, and then just enough to mark up the steel. Same on this side, and then we'll take the MDF off and finish drilling through the steel. Then hold it on the steel for a little bit and mark it. Same for this side. Now we got 2 little marks there. But if you don't have any lube for this, WD-40 will work just fine, and we all have that. Now we've got these holes lined up. We just need the base one down here. So you can go ahead and take it and clamp it and then drill through. I'm just going to hold it here. They don't need to be lined up perfectly. They don't affect each other. Just typical way putting on the bolts and nuts. Just going to have a wrench, hold the nut, tighten it up. Now I probably will go back and put washers on whenever I do the locking nut. But for right now, since it's what I have on me, I'm just going to leave it like this. All right, what the sandwich style does is it allows us, when we're using our router, it'll stop it from being pulled off. The base will stop it from being pulled off of the base. It gives it an edge to catch on. The width here sets the width for our router. And then it's also sandwiched, so then it flattens the angle iron here, so we know it's flat, perpendicular to our, or parallel to our workpiece. Now that we've got our 2 pieces on the side, go ahead and check your angle iron across your workbench if you got a perfectly flat one, so to see if you have any gaps. I know my angle iron are perfectly parallel and flat to each other because there is no gaps on my workbench. All right, here's the finished product. You can always add some more stuff. I was thinking about possibly some aluminum rails across the top here just to allow the metal to slide across a little better. Possibly some type of string or pulley system so I can pull and it'll pull this for me. Now at this stage, a lot of people, I feel like a lot of the videos I've seen all add some paste wax to their build to help it slide across. I'm on team against that because paste wax, it's just like using WD-40 on a rollerball table or something. It builds up gunk. You don't want it on something like this where we're going to have so much sawdust and it's going to be between joints. So it'll collect that sawdust and then stick it between these joints and make it a lot harder to move back and forth, even up here on the sled. So I'm going to keep it with nothing on it, see how it works. If you guys have something that works really well on your sled, then leave it in the comments and let me know. But right now, I'm just going to keep it bare.